Welcome to God Connection. This is the message you have been waiting for. This is the confirmation your spirit has been seeking, the truth that echoes in the quietest parts of your soul. There are moments in life ordained by the divine, when a single move doesn't just end the game, it shatters the entire board and rewrites the very laws of reality itself. That is exactly what happened the day you, the chosen one, delivered a spiritual checkmate that still echoes through their conscience like a celestial alarm, a relentless ringtone they can never ever silence. It wasn't a loud, worldly victory. It wasn't a dramatic, public confrontation. It wasn't even a planned revenge arc that you plotted out. No, it was something far more profound, far more divine, and infinitely more haunting. You won. You won completely, and you did it by becoming someone they never, ever believed you could become. They are still reeling, lost in a state of cognitive dissonance, and we are about to break down exactly why they can't, and won't, ever forget the day you ascended. Here is a fact of their material world, a limitation they cannot escape. Psychologists, in their limited understanding of the human mind, say that the brain remembers emotional shocks with 5 times more intensity than ordinary memories. 5 times. That means when someone, especially someone who built their entire identity on underestimating you, witnesses a version of you that fundamentally contradicts the pathetic, weak storyline they built in their head, their mind locks onto it. It becomes a permanent computer glitch in their operating system. A file that cannot be deleted. A bug they cannot debug. A corrupted piece of code that crashes their entire program every time they try to run it. And trust me, your glow-up, your divine ascension, your spiritual fortification was such a profound glitch in their matrix that some of them are still convinced the universe itself pressed the wrong button. They look at your life, at your peace, at your strength, and they think, this wasn't supposed to happen. They are right, it wasn't supposed to happen in their script. But it was always written in God's. What makes your victory so unforgettable, so permanent, isn't that you beat them at their own game. It's that they were never, ever supposed to lose to someone they thought they had completely figured out. You were their predictable character. You were their underestimated piece on the board, the pawn they thought they could sacrifice. You were the player they thought they could corner with their basic low-vibrational tactics. But instead of folding, instead of breaking, instead of reacting the way they predicted, you executed a move so clean, so spiritually fortified, so devastatingly unexpected that even God himself probably leaned back and said, "Now, that is what I trained them for." Now, every single time your name comes up in conversation, you can almost hear their souls doing that awkward, strained cough. The one people make when they pretend they're fine, but they are most definitely not fine. Because deep down, in a place they refuse to admit, they know you didn't just exit their life. You left a permanent, spiritual imprint on their narrative. A watermark, a reminder, a spiritual scar. Pick whichever term makes you feel fancy. Your evolution became the plot twist they never rehearsed for. You were supposed to be the one who needed them. You were supposed to be the one who stumbled, the one who would come crawling back. You were supposed to be the one who doubted themselves forever. Instead, you matured. You transformed. You evolved into a presence they cannot outrun, even when they desperately try to pretend they've moved on. Your rise became the kind of memory the ego hates, the kind it tries to bury but the soul can't delete. And the funniest part? They still don't know what version of you is coming next. They are terrified, they are impressed, they are confused, and they are weirdly, obsessively invested. They are like someone watching a series they swear they're done with, but they still binge watch in secret at 3 a.m. This is the story of how the chosen one, through their God connection, delivered a checkmate so precise, so spiritual, and so irreversible that the echo of it still rattles the rooms they walk into. Let's dive in, because what happened next is the part that truly keeps them up at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying your victory. 1. You didn't just win. You rewrote their entire playbook. What shook them to their very core, what shattered their false reality, wasn't the simple fact that you rose. They could have handled that, they could have dismissed it as luck. What shattered their reality was how you rose. They were fully prepared for a low-vibrational fight. They expected competition. They were rubbing their hands together, anticipating the petty back and forth, the draining energetic exchanges, maybe even a desperate, tearful attempt from you to prove yourself. They had their scripts ready for that. They had their traps laid. Instead, you did the one thing they had no defense against. You shifted gears into a frequency they cannot access. You made their entire strategy, their entire reality, collapse right in front of them. You grew in silence. You elevated without announcement. You transformed in ways they never, ever predicted, because they were too focused on the outdated version of you they had created in their minds. They didn't see you as someone evolving. They were incapable of seeing it. They saw you only as someone they could outrun, outsmart, or outshine. And that, right there, was their first and most critical mistake. You weren't trying to prove anything to them. You weren't even reacting to them. You were on a different mission. You were learning. You were growing. You were observing. You were refining yourself in the holy fire. While they were busy rehearsing attacks for a battle you had already outgrown, you were ascending. When your breakthrough finally came, it wasn't a win in their traditional worldly sense. It was a total shift in the terrain. The very ground moved beneath their feet because everything they relied on, their gossip, their manipulation, their triangulation, no longer worked. The tactics that used to throw you off balance suddenly had no effect. You stood there, centered and calm, and their attacks passed through you like wind through a mountain. The manipulation fell flat. The gossip lost its flavor and turned to ash in their mouths. The competition became laughably, pathetically small compared to where your mind, your spirit, and your God connection had evolved. What haunts them is how effortless it looked. They spent so much time, so much energy plotting how to stay ahead of you. Yet your divinely guided evolution outpaced every version of themselves they tried to become. Your growth wasn't loud, but the impact was undeniable. You changed the rules of the game without making a single announcement. And by the time they realized the game had shifted, you were already operating on a completely different level. That is the real checkmate. The moment they realized their entire playbook was designed for a version of you that no longer exists. This is why they can't forget you. Your rise exposes how limited, how small, their understanding of you truly was. They weren't defeated because you fought harder. They were defeated because you transformed into someone they could never predict, never control, and never, ever diminish again. Your evolution wasn't a win, it was a revelation that rewrote everything they thought they knew about power, strength, and who you were becoming. 2. They can't unsee the fact that you saw through them. What truly unsettles them, what makes their skin crawl, isn't what you did. It's what you knew. They spent so much time, so much effort shaping a version of themselves they wanted you to believe. They built a careful facade, a mask. They were hoping that their charm, their feigned confidence, or their fake humility would blind you. But you moved through their layers like they were made of cheap glass. Every motive, every hidden intention, every subtle, toxic shift in their energy. Your spirit, your amplified discernment, picked it up long before they even acted on it. That is the part they can't forget. You understood them with a clarity they don't even have about themselves. You didn't need them to confess their true feelings. You didn't need worldly evidence. You didn't need confirmation from anyone else. Your discernment, your divine gift, read them like an open book they foolishly thought was locked. They thought they were complicated. They thought they were unpredictable. They truly believed they were operating on a level of social cunning that you couldn't possibly decode. But your instincts were sharper than their performances. Your intuition, your direct line to the truth, caught the lie the moment they tried to disguise it. They were playing a role. You were studying the soul behind the role. What stings them, what keeps them awake, is the fact that they could not hide from you. You saw their insecurities cowering behind their bravado. You saw the green-eyed jealousy behind their plastic smile. You saw their selfish intentions behind their kind gestures. You saw the deep, abiding fear behind their arrogance. You saw the cracks they worked so hard to conceal from the world. And here is the checkmate move. You didn't have to expose them to win. You didn't have to point or scream. You simply walked away knowing more about them than they were comfortable admitting to themselves. This is why your presence and even your absence still lingers in their memory. People can forget someone who hurt them. They can forget someone who helped them. They can even forget someone who loved them. But they never forget the person who saw them, exactly as they are. You were that mirror they didn't ask for but desperately needed. You reflected back the truth they avoided, the flaws they denied, and the motives they tried to bury. They can't unsee the fact that you saw the real them, clearly, calmly, and without their permission. And that kind of truth leaves a permanent mark, whether they speak on it or not. 3. You exposed the fragility they called power. What shook them wasn't that you stood up to them. It was how quickly their so-called strength, their entire house of cards, fell apart the moment you stopped giving it your attention. They built their whole identity on being the loudest, the toughest, the most influential, the most in control person in the room. They walked around with a manufactured confidence that looked solid from the outside, but was completely hollow on the inside. It was a balloon and you were the pin. And as long as you played along, as long as you were intimidated, as long as you shrank, their power seemed real. But the day you stepped into your own strength, the day you anchored yourself in your divine connection, their entire image started crumbling in slow motion. They relied on intimidation, manipulation, and control because they thought those things made them powerful. But true power, your power, doesn't need performance. It doesn't need followers. It doesn't need fear. Real power is stable, quiet, and solid even when it's not being watched. What you revealed, without even trying, is that their version of power was a parasite. It needed an audience to survive. It needed your fear to feel strong. Once you stopped reacting, once you stopped shrinking, once you stopped being influenced by their chaotic energy, they had nothing left to stand on. Their confidence deflated like a punctured tire. Because it was never real confidence, it was dependency. You didn't take away their power. You simply stopped feeding it. You cut off its supply. And once their ego realized you were no longer under their spell, the devastating truth came to the surface. They weren't powerful, they were insecure. They weren't in control, they were pretending. They weren't solid, they were fragile. This is why your growth, your peace, your success feels like a direct threat to them. It highlights everything they've been hiding. People who rely on false power always crumble when confronted by someone who doesn't need permission to be strong. You expose the weakness behind their loudness, the fear behind their authority, and the emptiness behind their confidence. And they can't forget you because being around you and now watching you from a distance revealed a version of themselves they've been running from for years. You didn't challenge their power. You revealed the truth. They never had any to begin with. And once someone experiences that kind of profound exposure, it becomes a memory that their pride can never, ever fully recover from. For your exit revealed that you were the backbone. The moment you walked away wasn't just a change. It was a collapse. They genuinely, arrogantly believed your absence would go unnoticed. They thought things would continue flowing the same way. They truly believed you were just another replaceable piece in their setup. But your departure created a vacuum, a shift they never prepared for. Everything that once felt smooth when you were there suddenly became chaotic. Conversations got tense. Plans fell apart. People started clashing. Tasks that used to run effortlessly started dragging, failing, and imploding. The balance you brought, the stability you maintained, the quiet, thankless work you handled in the background, it was suddenly glaringly missing. And the structure which they thought they were holding up couldn't hold itself up anymore. You were the one keeping everything grounded without needing credit. You were the one diffusing the tension. You were the one bringing clarity. You were the one solving the problems and doing the work that others assumed just happened by magic. You were the glue. You were the calm. You were the organizer, the emotional anchor, the strategist, the peacekeeper. You played all these roles and they didn't even notice until you weren't there to play them. They mistook your steady presence for something ordinary. They mistook your competence for something simple. Because you made difficult things look easy. But ease doesn't mean weakness. Ease means mastery. The real revelation for them came when the fractures started showing. People who used to be confident suddenly felt uncertain. Those who claimed they didn't need you began scrambling to fill the gaps they once ignored. Even the ones who pretended you were forgettable started feeling the sharp, cold ripple of your absence in their everyday routine. The whole environment shifted because the one person, the one pillar, holding it all together was no longer there. And the worst part for them? They can't pretend not to notice. They can't twist the story. They can't minimize your contribution. They can't downplay your impact. Because the proof is in the fallout. The proof is in the ashes. Everything that broke after you left highlights everything you were holding up while you were still there. This realization eats at them. Not because they miss you, their ego is too big for that. They are eaten alive because they now have to acknowledge a truth they never wanted to face. The strength they underestimated was the strength they depended on the most. Your exit didn't just expose the cracks. It revealed you were the foundation they didn't respect until it was gone. 5. They hate that you didn't become the monster they created. This is the one that bothers them the most. It isn't what you went through. It's who you became after it. They were certain, absolutely certain, that their behavior would twist you. They were counting on it. They wanted to break you into something angry, unstable, or bitter. They expected you to lose yourself, lose control, or lose your character. Their plan was simple: hurt you so deeply that you would start acting like the very thing they accused you of being. But their entire strategy, their entire demonic plot, crumbled. It turned to dust. Because you did not become the version of yourself they tried to engineer. You didn't turn hateful. You didn't turn vengeful. You didn't turn dark. You turned wise. You learned how to read people with a sharper clarity. You learned how to protect your energy without shutting down your heart. You learned how to see people's intentions without waiting for them to show you. You learned boundaries. You learned patience. You learned a strength that doesn't need applause. And that kind of growth, that kind of alchemy, turning their poison into your power, is something they never imagined you'd reach. They couldn't. They were too invested in your downfall, not your revolution. The fact that you refused to become a distorted, broken copy of their behavior is the biggest blow to their ego. They wanted you to act out. They were praying for you to lose your mind so they could point at you and say, "See? See? That's why we treated them that way. They're crazy." They wanted justification. They wanted proof that their cruelty was deserved. They wanted you to react in a way that excused their actions. But instead of becoming the villain in their story, you became the reminder of who they really are. You healed. And healing is something they can't fake. You found peace. And peace is something their chaos can't manufacture. You grew. And growth is something their pride won't allow. Now they are stuck. They are stuck with the raw, unfiltered guilt of how they treated someone who did nothing but rise above the mess they created. The truth is, they hate your strength because it exposes their weakness. They hate your grace because it highlights their lack of character. They hate your healing because it proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that you were never the problem. And they hate the fact that in the end you won. You won not by fighting back, but by refusing to become anything less than who God truly called you to be. You beat them without raising your voice, without seeking revenge, and without matching their toxicity. And that is a defeat their ego will never, ever fully recover from. 6. Your growth made their whole storyline collapse. They spent years scripting a story about you. It was a story that suited their agenda, their ego, and their narrative perfectly. In their minds, you were small. You were flawed. You were predictable. You were manageable. They rehearsed this version of you endlessly. They explained to others and to themselves why you weren't capable, why you deserved certain treatment, and why their own toxic actions were justified. Every insult, every manipulation, every dismissal was framed to fit the narrative they had created. They told themselves that controlling the story meant controlling you. And for a while, at least in the delusional version they believed existed, it worked. But growth doesn't ask for permission. Change doesn't knock politely before arriving. Your evolution didn't just challenge their perception, it shattered it entirely. It took a sledgehammer to their carefully constructed dollhouse. The person they built in their minds ceased to exist the moment you stepped into the fullness of who you truly were. Your rise, your success, your peace, your glow, it exposed a reality they were not ready to face. You were capable. You were resilient. You were intelligent. You were unstoppable. Everything they had assumed about your limits was wrong. And the story they had invested so much time in crafting suddenly, catastrophically, fell apart. The plot twists were no longer theirs to control. They belonged to you. And the hardest part for them? They can't hide from it. The truth is glaring. If you became this extraordinary, this successful, this healed, then maybe, just maybe, they were the problem all along. Maybe the blame they shifted onto you, the way they tried to justify themselves, was nothing but a pathetic projection. That realization is a haunting one, because it forces a self-reflection that pride and ego rarely allow. They rehearsed the villain role for you, but the play no longer fit the stage. And now the audience can see it clearly. Your growth didn't just elevate you, it exposed them. It invalidated every script they had written, every assumption they had clung to, and the false sense of superiority they relied on. Nothing torments someone more than discovering that the villain they imagined has been replaced by a force they can't control. You didn't just win. You rewrote the story. And now, the version of them that needed you to be small is crumbling under the weight of your truth. 7. You unmasked intentions they never planned to confront. What unsettles them the most, what makes them truly nervous, is how easily you saw beneath their surface. They put so much effort into crafting that polished version of themselves. Calm, confident, supportive, unbothered. They hid their jealousy behind compliments. They hid their competitiveness behind friendly advice. They hid their deep, gnawing insecurity behind loud smiles and arrogant posturing. They assumed you would fall for it just like everyone else did. They believed their performance was airtight. But your intuition, your God connection, works differently. You didn't need arguments. You didn't need signs. You didn't need them to slip up. You felt the truth long before it showed itself. You sensed the envy in their tone when they praised you, but their voice was just a little too tight. You caught the tension in their body language whenever you succeeded. You saw the obsession that they masked as concern. You noticed how they copied you, then questioned you, then compared themselves to you, then tried to one-up you, all while pretending they were simply being supportive. You picked up on the toxic energy they thought they had concealed perfectly. And the most threatening part for them? You never confronted them. You never exposed them publicly. You just quietly understood. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was discernment. You didn't need to clap back. You didn't need to point fingers. You didn't need to make a scene. You let them reveal themselves and you simply made mental notes. Once you saw who they really were beneath the mask, you simply adjusted your distance and protected your peace. And that subtle shift is what left them so nervous. They could tell you knew something. They could feel that you had pulled away. But they couldn't figure out what you had figured out. That uncertainty, that lack of control, eats at them more than any confrontation ever could. People can handle being disliked. They can handle being challenged. But being seen, truly seen down to the studs, exposes everything they tried to hide even from themselves. You didn't shame them. You just held up a mirror they never asked for. You reflected their intentions, their fears, and their motives without speaking a single word. And that kind of clarity is unforgettable, because it forces a person to face parts of themselves they've been running from for years. You became the reminder of the truth they hoped no one would ever notice. That's why they can't forget you. You didn't ruin their image, you revealed the reality behind it. And once someone has been unmasked, they can never pretend the mask was real again. If you are feeling this truth in your spirit, if you recognize your own story in this divine message, then you are in the right place. This is your family. This is your God connection. This is your confirmation. Before we continue to the next point, take a powerful second right now and affirm your journey by subscribing to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a single transmission of truth. You are not alone in this. We are rising together. Now let's get back to the truth they cannot escape. 8. You show them the consequences of underestimating the wrong soul. What stings them the most, what feels like a splinter in their pride, is that everything they misjudged about you became the very thing that elevated you beyond their reach. They looked at you and saw someone they could easily manipulate, overlook, or control. They mistook your kindness for weakness. They mistook your patience for passivity. They mistook your humility for a lack of ability. They believed you needed their direction, their approval, their validation, anything that made them feel above you. They assumed you didn't know your worth, so they treated you like someone who didn't have any. But the truth they never expected to face is that your strength was never loud. It was rooted. It was ancient. It was spiritual. And it was quietly, unbreakably powerful. Your rise was not a clapback. It was alignment. You didn't force anything. You didn't fight dirty. You didn't lose yourself in the chaos they created. You simply grew beyond their understanding. Every time they dismissed you, you learned. Every time they underestimated you, you sharpened. Every time they ignored your value, you stepped deeper into your calling. What they thought would break you actually built a version of you they were never, ever prepared to handle. Now they're stuck. They are stuck replaying the very moments they brushed you aside. The times they talked over you. The times they laughed at you, doubted your ideas, or assumed you'd always stay in the background. They revisit those memories with a sting they can't ignore because now it's crystal clear. They weren't rejecting someone who was weak. They were rejecting someone who was growing into a force they can no longer reach, influence, or even comprehend. Their regret didn't show up when you left. It showed up when they realized who you became after you left. That's when it hit them. They didn't destroy you, they revealed the fire in you. They didn't break you, they exposed their own blindness. They didn't win, they gave you the motivation you didn't even know you needed. What haunts them is the stark realization that they were wrong about you at every single level. They underestimated your mind, your heart, your resilience, your spirit, and your destiny. And now, the consequences of that divine misjudgment sit with them every single day, while you continue to rise in the very places they swore you'd never reach. 9. You became the mirror they've spent their lives avoiding. What unsettles them the most is not what you did to them. It's what your presence, your very being, forced them to see about themselves. You didn't attack them. You didn't expose them. You didn't call them out. You didn't need to. Simply being yourself, in your full authenticity, confronted them with truths they have avoided for years. You triggered the insecurities they pretend don't exist. You highlighted the jealousy they hide behind jokes. You unmasked the manipulative tendencies they justify as, "That's just how I am." Your energy made their mask slip. And once the mask slipped, even for a second, they couldn't pretend they didn't notice the cracks. People like them survive by controlling the storyline, by shaping how others see them, by hiding the parts of themselves they refuse to work on. But around you, that facade just didn't hold. Your authenticity clashed with their pretense. Your honesty clashed with their performance. Your emotional depth clashed with their emotional avoidance. And every time you stood in your truth, it highlighted the lies they were living in. You didn't even mean to expose them. Your qualities simply illuminated what they lacked. Your empathy made their selfishness obvious. Your accountability made their denial stand out. Your growth highlighted their stagnation. Your inner strength, your quiet peace, made their fragility shine through. Every interaction with you quietly revealed who they were beneath the surface. And that kind of exposure is something ego-driven people cannot tolerate for long. They can't forget you because you represented clarity. You were the one person they couldn't manipulate, confuse, or impress. You saw through the layers they spent years perfecting, and you did it without effort. That kind of seeing is unforgettable, especially to someone who avoids self-reflection at all costs. Being around you forced them to face the truth. They aren't as healed as they pretend. They aren't as confident as they project. And they aren't as genuine as they claim. You never said these words to them directly. You didn't have to. Yet the realization sits in their chest like a weight they can't get rid of. This is why your absence is just as powerful as your presence. Even if you never return, they are still haunted by what they saw in themselves because of you. You were the mirror they never asked for but desperately needed. And once someone sees their real reflection, they can never fully go back to pretending. 10. Your moves revealed you were always 10 steps ahead. People like them, carnal people, assumed you were naive because you were quiet. They mistook your patience for passivity. They mistook your kindness for cluelessness. They mistook your silence for confusion. But what they never, ever realized was that you were never playing on their level. You were observing from above it. They were playing checkers with emotions, ego, and manipulation. You were playing chess with intuition, foresight, and divine timing. While they performed for attention, you analyzed behavior. While they hid their intentions, you mapped out their motives. While they strategized short-term, selfish wins, you were preparing long-term, divine stability. They didn't understand that your spirit, your God connection, was studying every shift in their tone, every inconsistency in their words, every contradiction in their actions. You were gathering data they didn't even know they were giving you. You weren't reacting to their moves, you were reading their patterns. They tried to shock you with sudden chaos, but you had mentally predicted the backlash before they even executed it. They tried to provoke you into self-destruction, but you already knew what trap they were laying, and you simply refused to step into it. They tried to confuse you with mixed signals and word games, but you discerned the lie within the performance. You played the long game. They played themselves. Your victory wasn't loud. It was inevitable. It came from the maturity of restraint, the wisdom of observation, and the clarity of seeing their true nature long before they had the courage to admit it to themselves. And now they're replaying every moment in their minds. See, what truly torments them is not that you won. It's that you won quietly. They expected a loud reaction, an emotional breakdown, or a desperate retaliation. Instead, you gave them strategy, foresight, and grace. You didn't fight them, you outgrew them. You didn't expose them, you let their own behavior expose itself. You didn't need to win a battle, they destroyed themselves trying to defeat you. And that's why they can't forget you. You weren't just ahead of them in the moment. You were ahead of them in character, vision, wisdom, and purpose. You were always the higher level player. They were just late to realize it. 11. You ended the cycle they were relying on. They weren't just relying on your presence. They were relying on your patterns. Your compassion kept their ego alive. Your forgiveness kept their behavior justified. Your emotional intelligence kept their dysfunction functional. Your stability kept their chaos from collapsing. They weren't afraid of losing you. They were afraid of losing access to the version of you that kept saving them from themselves. They expected you to reset everything after every betrayal just like you always did. They counted on your softness to absorb the impact of their damage. They banked on your loyalty to override logic. They assumed your heart would continue doing the emotional labor that their conscience refused to do. But what they never saw coming was the day you finally recognized the cycle. The day your God connection became so clear that you decided to break the cycle instead of repair it. Because there comes a moment in every chosen one's journey when you stop trying to heal what only wants to hurt. Stop trying to understand what refuses to be honest. Stop trying to nurture what has no intention of growing. And that moment becomes a turning point so powerful it feels like a spiritual earthquake. When you walked away for the last time, everything collapsed. Not because you destroyed anything, but because you were the only thing holding it together. And deep down they know it. The day you didn't come back wasn't just a boundary, it was a revelation, a declaration, a spiritual verdict. It told them, the war is over. Not because you won, but because I stopped playing. See, they mistook your healing for weakness. They never realized your silence was a decision. They never noticed your distance was a sign. They didn't understand that your heart had reached its final capacity. And once a chosen one reaches that point, the cycle doesn't pause. It shatters. And now they live in the ruins of a dynamic you once kept alive. They have to sit with the version of themselves you always softened. They have to face the consequences you used to absorb. They have to confront the emotions you used to filter for them. That's why they can't forget you. You didn't just leave their life. You ended their pattern. You forced them into a reality where their behavior cost them something permanent. And the truth that haunts them the most? They didn't lose you because you stopped loving. They lost you because they refused to change. 12. They can't handle that you thrived without their apology. This one drives them insane. They assumed their silence would cage you. They believed their avoidance, their excuses, their refusal to ever acknowledge what they did would keep you small, broken, or dependent. They thought that if they didn't apologize, you would stay stuck in the loops they created. They pictured you waiting for validation, replaying old conversations, trying to justify their behavior in your own mind. That was their plan. That was their last vestige of power. But you didn't wait. You didn't linger in the vacuum they left behind. You didn't replay their words in your head. You didn't let their avoidance dictate your worth. Instead, you took the energy they withheld and you turned it into momentum. Their silence, which was meant to destabilize you, became your fuel. Their absence, which was meant to weaken you, became the stage for your greatest growth. You stopped shrinking. You stopped explaining. You stopped justifying. You built a life so full, so vibrant, and so aligned with your truth that their refusal to apologize became utterly and completely irrelevant. Now they are the ones who are stuck. They are forced to watch the consequences of their own choices from the sidelines. Every accomplishment you make, every smile on your face, every step you take forward without them is a deafening reminder that they no longer control the narrative. They wanted power over you. They wanted to shape your emotions, your reactions, your path. Instead, you reclaimed it all without even needing their recognition. What haunts them the most is the living proof you carry in your life. The life you've built despite them. The peace you found without them. And the growth they cannot erase. They can't erase it because it doesn't rely on them. It never did. You didn't wait for their permission to rise. And that realization leaves them profoundly unsettled. They thought they could hold your spirit hostage with guilt or silence. But you rewrote the rules. You thrived while they stayed stuck in their own justification, staring at a truth they can't fix. You were never theirs to break, and their apology or lack thereof never defined your destiny. They can't forget you because your freedom is the ultimate reflection of the limits they once thought they had over you. 13. Your presence shifted atmospheres they didn't know were fragile. It wasn't about what you said. It wasn't about what you did. It was about what you carried. The moment you entered a room, a subtle change occurred. It was almost imperceptible to those who weren't paying attention, but for them the shift was seismic. Energy that once felt stable and predictable suddenly wavered. People they counted on to maintain appearances started showing cracks. Tensions they thought were hidden rose to the surface. Secrets that had been carefully buried became harder to hide. And the most terrifying part for them? You weren't trying to expose anyone. You didn't confront. You didn't accuse. You simply existed. And that authentic existence, that high-frequency vibration, illuminated everything they had been trying to keep in shadow. Your presence acted like a divine mirror, reflecting inconsistencies they thought only they could see. Where there was manipulation, your calm clarity made it obvious. Where there was pretense, your authenticity highlighted the cracks. Where there was false confidence, your quiet, solid strength drew attention to the insecurity cowering behind it. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. But it was undeniable. The energy you carried, your God connection, couldn't be ignored. And that subtle disruption was enough to make them feel completely off balance. Even people around them, people who weren't directly involved, started noticing. Conversations changed. Eyes shifted. The entire atmosphere subtly adjusted in response to your presence. You weren't loud. You weren't confrontational. But the truth of their dynamics became impossible to maintain. And that's what scares them. You didn't need to say a single word to change the game. Your mere existence, your frequency, forced everyone to see realities they had carefully hidden from themselves. That's why they can't forget you. You were the disruption they never saw coming. The force that revealed what had been quietly unraveling under the surface. You made them face inconsistencies, weaknesses, and truths they had spent a lifetime concealing, simply by being exactly who you were. And the mark you left on that energy, on that room, on their awareness, is something they will carry forever. Because once an atmosphere shifts in your presence, it never truly goes back to what it was.